Welcome to episode 1, the inaugural episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your host, Patrick Macklin. We're going to talk about sports, we're going to talk about politics, we're going to talk about social issues, we're even going to talk about religion. And we'll take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. We all need to laugh a little bit more. The easiest person to laugh at is yourself. So let's get right into it.
Act 1 Sports.
All of the teams I root for are terrible. Incompetently managed by ownership, by coaches, managers, you name it. I don't know what kind of dark cloud was following me around as a child that I took an affinity to so many different teams from so many different cities, and all of them terrible. Some of these teams have had their day in the sun. But over the course of a 40, 50, sometimes 70-year historical review, a track record, those were the anomalies. Those little bits of joy were the anomaly. The standard, the mean, if you will, is terrible. Most of the sports landscape today from media is gushing over Team A, Team B, Player B. That will not be the approach on this podcast. We will wrestle with the affinity that we have for Team A or Team B, Player A or Player B, given what we know in the modern world of the people who make up the infrastructure of these leagues, these teams. The older I've gotten, the less critical I can be of any player on any team in any league. Many of the owners of the franchises in these leagues have proven themselves to be the true villains. And it makes it harder and harder for me to spend the time, the attention, the money following what are no more than incompetent boobs using these sports franchises to promote their own self-image, their own self-interests. Sports are supposed to be a distraction. But the distraction in modern times is less about the product on the field and more about how people can fail up in their ownership of these franchises. How is that possible? It's us. We allow people to fail up by our attention, by our desire, by our capacity to spend our money on the product. This podcast, in many ways, will be an open letter to myself about how I wrestle with the rationale that I use to continue to turn on the television, to continue to patronize in light of the open disrespect that most of the leagues, that most of the franchises, the individual owners show to me and every other fan. Where to begin? Let's begin at the top, of course. The dumpster fire that is the University of Tennessee football program. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Anyone under the age of 30 who's listening to this is going to say, "What are you talking about, jackass?" The mighty? Yes, you are correct. Under 30, EDM-loving individual. You are correct. The University of Tennessee football program is not mighty. It is only the elderly that will look at the program and think national championships, SEC championships, distant memories for those of us who actually experienced it, who were at the university at the time, but ancient history for most. There's been plenty of fodder in the media about what's going on at the program. But very few focus intently on the long term or the systemic issues at the University of Tennessee. Namely, the revolving door that's been the administration at the university. The revolving door that's been the athletic department at the university. Cabinet officials in the Trump administration have nothing on the University of Tennessee. Administrators go shuffling in and out of the place like it's some kind of circus routine where clowns are coming out of a car, one after the other, turning around, going right back, getting into the car, and coming out again. I think the clown analogy is quite appropriate, but I'm sure it's offensive to clowns. I'm sure there's clowns out there who are saying, hey, we make people happy. It's true. Because nobody in the athletic department or in the hierarchy of the University of Tennessee administration is making anyone happy, is bringing any joy to anyone's lives. They're firefighters, constantly putting out fires of their own making. So after a 3-year rebuilding program that was preceded by a 3-year rebuilding program that was preceded by 2 years of incompetence, we now have ourselves a 3-year rebuilding program. I see a consistency there. Same song, different verse. Tennessee fan, on their part, is upset that after the latest tire fire, we can't go out and get a bigger name, a more marquee coach. This is where reality and the world of sport dissect for most people, for most sports fans. Look at yourself. Would you go and take a job that you didn't think was as good as the job that you currently have at a place where there's absolutely no stability in management, where all of the clients had absolutely unreasonable expectations about the quality of the product, the speed of delivery, how quickly things were going to turn around? No one would take that job unless the money was such that you couldn't turn that job down. That is the bitter pill that the University of Tennessee fan is now experiencing, is now having to swallow. The market has spoken. No one wants to go there unless the money is such that they can't turn it down. And no marquee name coach is going to be outbid by the University of Tennessee. They're going to have enough suitors that they're going to have options. A lot of fans will cry out, I'm still loyal. I still have faith. And you may. But you also may be the cause of the problem. To say that we may need to be patient as a fan base is an understatement. We're going to have the patience of Job. This isn't going to turn around quickly, if at all. And yet, having said that, where's my dumb ass going to be in September in front of my television, looking to see how the team performs in its first game under a new coach? Incapable of turning away. It's like going out drinking and at 2:30 in the morning hitting the drive-thru at Jack in the Box. You just feel terrible. Not the day after. I mean, with any sense of dignity and self-respect, you feel bad sitting in the Uber, going through the drive-thru, thinking, I'm going to eat this food. Tuning into that first game in September of 2021, I'll feel no different. It's pretty pathetic. And yet, in my own defense, I do have a sense of dignity. I do have a sense of self-respect. And I expressed as much in my separation from the National Football League. Why, you ask? How? Because I rooted for the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions. The franchise that helped me divorce the NFL. Like anyone with low self-esteem and a terrible relationship, it took me years to make the decision to separate. The Lions, on their part, made it easy. In fact, over the course of decades, they openly tried to convince me to divorce them. After the disastrous tenure of Matt Millen ended in an 0-16 season, that was enough. That did it for me. I don't think it comes as a surprise to any sports fan. The Detroit Lions in the year 2021 are rebuilding. They're in a rebuilding phase. Only in professional sport can you be rebuilding over the course of 60 to 70 years. There's no other enterprise that one can engage in human existence where you are continually rebuilding for decades, making no progress except for raking in enormous profits. Where does this rebuilding phase begin? As is the norm with the Lions, hiring a new coach. Yes, the Lions, as they do every 2 to 3 years, hired a new football coach. After seeing this press conference, it was like seeing an old girlfriend or an ex-wife put on 50 pounds, started smoking. You just knew you'd made the right decision by breaking up with them, by letting them go. What's this new coach's name? I can't even remember. Guy who's going to lose his job in week 9 of the 2022 season. That's what we'll call him. Guy who's going to lose his job in week 9 of the 2022 season had himself a press conference. I'm not savvy enough to put the actual clip into this, and frankly, I don't know if that'd be violating any copyright, but here's what the man said. This is the new head coach of an NFL franchise. Here's what I do know, Campbell said. Campbell, there's his name. This team is going to take on the identity of this city, all right? And this city's been down and found a way to get up, all right? It's found a way to overcome adversity. And so this team's going to be built on, we're going to kick you in the teeth, all right? And when you punch us back, we're going to smile at you. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off. I can't even keep reading this. Stop it. Just stop it. The Detroit Lions are going to bite a kneecap off. You want to keep it Michigan? You want to keep it Detroit? The Detroit Lions couldn't even bite off a piece of Little Caesars pizza. And if they did, they'd do what the rest of us do. They choke. As an aside, it just reminds me. Think about it. What is more Americana than football and pizza? And here you have, in one city, the most putrid of both. Who eats Little Caesars pizza? I mean, seriously. How the hell are they still in business? You know how the Lions are still in business. I mean, if that team could have gotten relegated out of the NFL, they wouldn't even be a Division I college football team. They'd be Division II. But for the fact that the NFL has a limited number of franchises and you get to stay in the league, no matter how bad you are, the Lions stay put. Little Caesars Pizza? How? If you spend an afternoon watching Detroit Lions football and eating Little Caesars Pizza, you'd start considering the merits of communism. Yeah, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe they got something figured out. If after all of the progress made in a democratic, capitalistic society, we have Detroit Lions football and Little Caesars Pizza, maybe we got it wrong. Speaking of wrong, let's discuss the New York Metropolitans, shall we? The New York Metropolitans, for close to 20 years, owned by billionaires who made their money in real estate in New York, who through hard work, dedication, and frankly stamina, were able to turn that franchise into lull Mets. Laugh out loud Mets. This wasn't easy. This was at the advent of the internet meme. When not publicly embarrassing the team, destroying its ability to compete, its on-field product, generally stirring up controversy and discord within the front office, within the farm system. The Wilpons were taking your money. That's right. By way of merchandise sales? No. By way of ticket sales? No. Those television rights? No. Oh, by way of that Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. That's right. They were heavily invested in the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, so much so that many of the profits that they had taken over the course of the close to 20 years that they owned the New York Metropolitans, they lost when the whole Ponzi scheme fell apart. You combine the money that they had taken away as quote-unquote profits with the money that they had invested, and they lost close to $500 million. $500 million. A lot of people don't realize this. Bobby Bonilla, former New York Metropolitan, leaves the team. He's owed $25 million on his contract. The Wilpons proposed to him, look, we'll give you $1 million a year for 25 years. How about that? Bonilla says, fine. A lot of people thought that that was hilarious, that the Mets were going to pay Bobby Bonilla for 25 years. Here's what's more hilarious. The reason why the Mets were going to pay Bobby Bonilla for 25 years is because they took the $25 million that they owed Bobby Bonilla and they invested it in Madoff's Ponzi scheme. By way of the investment, if that's what you would like to call it, by the time they ended up paying off Bobby Bonilla's contract, they would have made in profit over $2 million. You see, the Mets were able to take money out of the Ponzi scheme, pay Bonilla that $1 million, and they made roughly $167,000, $200,000 each year. That's the reason why Bobby Bonilla's contract was structured the way it was. That's how deep the Wilpons were with Bernie Madoff. Lull Mets. It comes to a head. The Wilpons finally sell. Thank God. Out from under that albatross. Out from under the buffoonery. And who buys them? A billionaire hedge fund manager, Steve Cohen, who within 90, 120 days, having acquired the team, loses $3 billion. $3 billion. Billionaire hedge fund manager one day buys the New York Mets, sweeping out ashtrays at a strip club the next day. $3 billion. Nothing is more lull Mets than one billionaire losing $500 million in a Ponzi scheme, having to sell the team to another billionaire, and that billionaire, upon acquiring the team, loses $3 billion. You go to Vegas, you lose $10,000. You come home, you're going to Big Lots, chasing after 128-ounce Dinty Moore beef stew cans. You look to your wife for solace, for understanding. She says, no sex until the pandemic is over. And I don't mean COVID-19, I mean COVID-20. Don't worry about the outcome of COVID-19. That's not going to help. I'm waiting for the next pandemic to be solved before I'll touch you again. You go to your kids, you promise them iPads. they're reduced to Barnes and Noble Nook. This is what Grandma and Grandpa use. Don't worry about it. You don't have to go to school. No one will know. This guy lost $3 billion. What's the first thing out of his mouth? I don't know why you'd think that my losing any money out of the hedge fund would affect the baseball team. No, not at all. I mean, why would we think that? Just because the last owner had all of the money that they had made, their billions of dollars, wrapped up in a Ponzi scheme, which then crippled the team in its ability to operate. Why would we think that? It pains me to say it, but lol Mets lives. Finally, I wanted to comment quickly on the Gina Carano situation. I don't think that I'm breaking any news to anyone, but at a high-level summary, she tweets, the mob on Twitter reacts, she gets fired. I'm always the last to know, a social media invalid, so to speak. Not much up on the hashtags. So I have to go to the Google machine, find out what this woman actually said that would warrant her being fired from Disney. And as it turns out, all she does is make what is a factual representation about what happened in another country at another time where people were stirred up by their hatred to turn against one another. What's interesting about her tweet, it actually touched on what was a more general paranoia within the Nazi regime. To truly understand what that paranoia looked like, let's take a little stroll down memory lane, a history lesson. There was a Lutheran pastor in Germany during the rise of the Nationalist Socialist Party, or the Nazis. His name was Martin Niemöller. Probably pronouncing that incorrectly. The man was initially a supporter of National Socialism and then became a staunch opponent, a very vocal opponent of National Socialism and the rise of the Nazi Party. He penned a now famous poem that is specific to the circumstances that he was facing at that time, but when you read it, generally can apply to a number of different nations, a number of different peoples at different points in their history. The poem's very short, so much so that I can actually read it to you right now. The poem is called First They Came, and it reads, First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The message is quite clear. When people are stirred up, particularly by fear, by anger, by hatred, they act irrationally. They do not act rationally, they act irrationally. And when that paranoia, when that irrational psychosis becomes the stuff of a mob, truly the only safe place to be is a part of the mob. The poem is so powerful because it demonstrates that the mob has an endless source of energy and a quenchless thirst for victims. It may start with one group, it may start with one goal or one aim, but once its momentum builds, it will not stop. There's always another mountain to climb, another obstacle to overcome. Those mountains, those obstacles are us. The mob is unquenchable. But Nazi Germany is not the only example that demonstrates the danger of a mob. Another great example is revolutionary France. Right after the colonies split from England, go through their revolution, France, not 20 years later, has their own revolution. But in that revolution, there was a time called the Terror, where the revolutionary mob killed at random. The only protection from that mob was allegiance to the revolution and to the mob. The mob frequently ended up turning on its own, killing many of the revolutionaries that had founded the revolutionary movement. Anecdotally, this just strikes me. The episode of The Simpsons where Burns is looking for his bear and Maggie Simpson discovers it in a bag of ice. Burns cuts off all television and beer to the city of Springfield. A mob forms to go and take the bear from the child, give it to Burns. That's precisely what happens. Of course, the child starts to cry. Dr. Julius Hibbard, in his immortal wisdom, says, "We've given the word mob a bad name." If you find yourself a participant, a member of a group simply seeking justice, but your methods are that of a mob, you're part of a mob. There is no reasonable position within a mob. A mob is a mob. No one in the Twitter mob would look at what happened at the Capitol during Biden's presidential confirmation and say that wasn't a mob. There were some well-meaning people. Likewise, if you're a member of the Twitter mob, you're a member of a mob. Now, on a personal level, as a consumer, I really didn't care about this story. I don't have the Disney Channel. I don't patronize Disney. I don't go to their parks. I'm not buying any of their products. It just seemed like another one of these outrage porn stories that pop up every 48 to 72 hours. But the more I reflect on it, the more I see the lesson in history and felt compelled to at least speak out on it. Whether or not I patronize the products of any of the corporations, whether or not I support any of their spokespeople, the one thing I certainly can't support is the mob. And I think more and more Americans, but even more broadly than that, people in Western democracies need to start speaking out. Because the Twitter mob does not speak for all of us. In fact, it very likely speaks for only a fraction of us. And certainly, it does not speak for the types of people that would be consumers for Disney, Disney products, Disney services, Disney parks. I don't know Gina Carano. I don't know her political beliefs. I don't know her social views. I don't care. It really isn't that significant to me. Well, what is significant is that someone could express themselves to advocate for harmonious civil discourse and to be fired from a job because of it. They came for Gina Carano, and I said nothing because I think Disney sucks, and I don't care about any of their products. But then they came for me, and who was left to speak for me? This is why I don't vote. A podcast.